Welcome back to In Session. You know, all day we've been looking at the various sides of Michael Jackson, asking the question, who is the real Michael Jackson? Well, we're taking your calls now about who Michael Jackson is and any questions you might have about our discussion today. I'm going to bring my panel, our panel of experts who spoke to us from New York just a few weeks ago. Steve Manning, close friend of Michael Jackson and the Jackson family, investigative journalist Diane Dimond, and Michael's former bodyguard, Mike Garcia. Anthony DeCurtis, by the way, of Rolling Stone, who was also in that piece, was not able to join us today, but he certainly, we were certainly good to have him with us back then. Let's start with our first caller. Sarah's calling in from Oklahoma. Sarah, what's your thought?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
I was just wondering, considering all the allegations that he was accused of having to do with child abuse, I'm just kind of curious, what was his reaction when he was alone? Because, you know, him being such a sensitive person and loving children as much as he did, to be accused of something like that, it's just, I'm curious of how he acted when he was finally alone with no cameras, no paparazzi, no journalists, you know. That's just something I'm curious about.
Okay, I assume, Sarah, you're talking about when he was accused of the child molestation and faced that trial.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for that call, Sarah. All right, you know, Steve, let me go to you on that one. Sarah is asking a question that we talked about a little bit during the interview. What was it like for him when he was alone?
Thank you, Sarah, for your question. You know what, I mentioned to interview before that we did a few weeks ago that Michael was devastated by that trial. I think that trial really killed him, I think. I mean, I saw him right before he got arrested in Vegas that day, and he couldn't believe it. I think the trial, the toll of the trial really put into his life. I mean, the concert tour was going to really revitalize him, but still, he was so hurt from those charges. It really hurt him deeply. I talked to him many times about that. So
in a sense, Steve, I guess his personality changed? Did his outlook on the world change?
It made him, it withdrew him more. He was a very introverted person, but it really withdrew him more from people. He was very untrusting of people. Very untrusting.
Very
really
untrusting.
Withdrew him. I mean, he was pained by that. It really pained him. It really did.
Did it affect...
Beyond belief. It really hurt him.
You know, Mike, you were around him from day to day. Did it affect, and there were news reports about this every once in a while, but did it affect the way he interacted with children after that point?
Like I said in the interview, you know, there was no children around except his own. But, you know, I was with him, you know, 2 days after he got back from Ireland. You know, everybody knows after the trial he left the country, and then, you know, he came back to the country. I was with him, you know, 2 days. And he, like Steve said, he was a little bit withdrawn. He was a little bit more secluded to himself. And I think he had, you know, I agree, he had a bad time, you know, trusting people again, and, you know, and people's perception of him. So it totally destroyed him.
Okay, but Mike, I mean, he had a reputation beforehand, almost reaching out to children. We talked about how he had that bed in his movie theater so that children who were terminally ill could lie down and watch movies with him. Did you ever hear him, or did he ever talk to you about how maybe that changed after this and he was a little less willing? Because I would understand that, if he was less willing to open up his home to others because of what might happen.
I think his attention was just focused on his kids after that.
Okay.
You know, being a good father and things. I don't, you know, he never brought up, you know, anything in what you're asking. So he was just focused on being a great father.
You know, Beth asked this question. This is an interesting one. She says, this is from Beth, one of our viewers. She says, this question may seem a little odd, but am I the only one who notices how all of the Jackson children speak so meekly? You know, Steve, tell us about the Jacksons' personalities. This is not the first time I've heard this, and it's why I think it's an interesting question. People say, why do they seem to speak in such muted tones?
Because that's a family trait. From their father, Mr. Jackson speaks very softly, and Mr. Jackson speaks softly. It's a family trait. They're very strong people. That's their vocal tone of being very passive, voice-wise. That's all.
Okay, let's go to Donna, our caller from Rhode. Okay, all right. Well, that I mean, that
and probably
makes sense.
maybe not to speak too much to the media.
Oh, wait. Okay, well, that's a different point, Mike. So you're saying...
Well, just in the fact of just being construed.
Ah, so they spoke lower. See, Diane Dimond, I remember we talked about this, and you thought there was a little bit of a different relationship with the media. Do you know, some people, and I've heard this before from psychiatrists, they say some people who talk softly forces other people to maybe lean in a little bit, maybe raises the attention.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Well,
Ryan,
you know, I agree with Steve. I agree with Steve that I think it is a family trait, and I think it is a trait that is often seen in very patriarchal homes. You do not speak loudly because it upsets daddy if you speak back loudly. And you know, let's admit it, old Joe Jackson had a real thumb on every member of that family, and I think that explains it more than anything else. Not the media, no.
Okay, I want to.
You know, Ryan, may I say something?
You know what, Steve, I'll let you say something quickly, but I want to make sure we get to our callers. Go ahead.
Once again about Mr. Jackson, this man raised, I mean, people in the 60s, especially black American families, were disciplined back in the 60s and 70s. It was no big, I mean, every black family, including yourself probably, Ryan, got disciplined.
You know, there is a thought process that says the discipline factor was different 20, 30 years ago than it is now. But
yes, it was.
You know, we talked about
this
a lot. We talked about this during the interview. That does it make it right? Some of the things that happen. I mean, that becomes a much more complicated question. Steve, hold on for a second because I want to take. Hold on for a second. I understand that point. I want to go to Donna in Rhode Island. Donna, what do you think?
Hi, Ryan. How are you?
Good.
I must say, I must give you props. It was an excellent, excellent show, and I'm so glad you had Steve on that has known Michael for many, many years. I'm 62 years old, and I've been a fan forever. But anyway, I was just wondering how Michael was as a disciplinarian with his children. Was he a really strict father, or was he more of a playmate with them, being that, you know, his father was so strict? Did he do it different with his children? I often wondered about that, and like I said again, I'm so glad you had Steve on, who's known him forever. Thank you, Steve, for coming on and letting us know more about the real Michael that we all loved and missed terribly. Thank you.
Mike, I'm going to, you know what, I want, actually, Steve, if I can, I want Mike to answer that question because, Mike, you were there firsthand. You saw the interaction. Go ahead, Mike. What did you think?
You know what, from what I saw, you know, we didn't step into his personal, you know, we didn't go beyond the doors of his own home. So we gave him that time with his kids. But I will tell you that when we were out in public, you know, he made sure the kids always said thank you and always were polite, you know, to everybody. You know, and you know, in that sense, you know, he kept on him, you know, in doing that. But to say how much of a disciplinary he was, I can't comment on that.
Okay, but was he playful with them? Was he
absolutely playful? Very playful. I mean, it was. Yes. You know, I did an interview before, and we talked about how they were like the four buddies. You know what I mean? And you know, we go places, and you know, who was the first one to jump in the car, and you know, they play little games and stuff like that as we traveled around. So, you know, he was very good with them and played with them a lot. You know.
You know, I want to get to another Facebook comment, and by the way, you should all know we received a ton, I mean, a lot of Facebook comments, tweets about this interview. So many interested in your perspectives on this. Sonia Lovenstand says, I feel he had more talent than he could have ever really understand, or many of us. Some people just have it, and he did. But I think, she says, when he did that Pepsi commercial and was burned, it caused him a lot of stress on his appearance, and he could not overcome it. That's when I believe that the downfall started to really come. Diane, talk about that a little bit. We talked about that in this interview, but do you think that was the turning point?
Yeah, we did touch on it in the documentary that was seen here earlier today, and I hope you play it again, because it was a real testament to the history of this man. I think your Facebook writer there has a very good point. At that point in time, Michael Jackson was beginning to strike out on his own. He was finding his own place in the entertainment world, and he gets burned. And I think he was already worried about his appearance. He had, you know, some plastic surgery and whatever, but the thing behind the burn on his scalp introduced him to his first doses of drugs because it was so painful. It introduced him to a doctor, Stephen Heflin, who did plastic surgery, who, by the way, did plastic surgery on some of Michael's friends. And so I do think that that was a real turning point in Michael's life. That's a very astute question.
All right, Diane, Steve, Mike, thank you. Hold on for a second, though. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to keep taking our viewers' questions, reading our Facebooks and tweets about Michael Jackson. Give us a call, 1-877-0013. Welcome back. We're taking your questions today about Michael Jackson and the Conrad Murray trial. We've got our panel with us that spoke to us from New York about who the real Michael Jackson is. Mike Garcia, Steve Manning, Diane Dimond. And let's start with our first caller. We've got Gladys on from Louisiana. Gladys, what's your thought or what's your question?
Yes, I wanted to know, was it possible that Michael could have had someone, or was there someone in his life personally that had the power to stand up to Michael and just say no to drugs? With love, I just think that if he would have had that love of his life, in his life, he would probably still be here on today.
Gladys, I'm glad you asked that question, and thank you. And Steve, we talked about this a little bit during the interview, but Gladys's question is a little different from what we talked about. I remember when Mike was sharing the story of how some of the family came over and tried to do an intervention. But Steve, in your mind, was there someone in Michael's world who could have done this?
You know, Ryan, I would say, as I mentioned before, the previous shows, that there were certain people around Michael and his entourage. And again, what to say about Mr. Jackson and Mrs. Jackson, those were his parents. He would be alive today if they were involved, people from the family. Certain people around Michael kept the family away for their own interests. You know, and it's very sad. It's a tragic story. I mean, your family loves you. I mean, Mr. Jackson was destroyed when Michael passed away. People said all the stuff on this, but this man, that was his son. That was her son, Mrs. Jackson's son. So there are certain people in his entourage, his employment, who wanted to keep him a certain kind of way. And I won't get any further about that. It's very sad to this day. And I said his family's more involved.
Steve, I have to ask you, as I did before, I have to ask you this. Tell us about these people. Who are these people who tried to keep, say, for example, Joe and Catherine away from Michael Jackson?
Well,
what you're intimating is that they could have saved his life.
There were former employees who worked for him, who kept him away, who maybe kept him under influence of certain situations to keep the family away for their own interests.
But are we?
But you know what, Ryan? If you're working for Michael Jackson, as your other panelist Mike did, and your boss Michael Jackson says, you know what? I don't want to see my brothers. Do not let them in the front gate of Neverland. You do what your boss tells you to do. I don't buy this thing that it was other people's fault that his family couldn't get to Michael Jackson. It was Michael Jackson's wish. Every time they came to him, they had their hand out. They wanted his money, or they wanted him to go on tour, or they wanted something from him. And this poor man, I think, just got sick and tired of it. It was his wish that most of his family stay away.
All right.
But Diane, there are people who kept the family away on their own accord. They really did. I know personally. People kept him away.
Who are these people, though? Wait, guys. And I want to make sure I get to our callers. And I'm sorry, I got to step in. I want to make sure I get to our callers. But Steve, I'm going to ask again. Who are these people? Because Mike, for example, worked with Michael Jackson, looked out for him, protected him, cared for him. So we're not talking about bodyguards.
Well, Mike knows who these people are. Michael knows who these people are, don't you, sir?
Yeah, they're former employees.
Exactly. There are certain people. I know Diane's saying too, that's not really true. There were certain.
Right.
It goes beyond the family not seeing the family. They kept the family away.
They didn't like us.
Interest.
They didn't like us because we were close. We were close to him. Mr. Jackson kept us in the kept us around him.
But are we talking about his assistant, or are we talking about? I mean, who?
I'll say former employees.
You talking about Grace the nanny? Are you talking about Karen Faye the hairdresser makeup lady? Or are you talking about Sony executives? I mean, there's this whole big conspiracy theory too.
I'm not going to get into the conspiracy thing today, but the people who were very close to him, who worked for him, kept the family away.
All right, you know what? I'm going to step on to Patty from Massachusetts. She's been waiting on the line with us. Patty, what's your thought?
Hi. First of all, I just have to thank you so much for letting me speak with Diane Dimond, one of my heroes. Diane, you tell it like it is. You are so brave. I admire you so incredibly much.
Patty,
and I thank you for all that you do. You're a beacon in journalism, and I love it. My two questions, I have two brief ones, not to embarrass you, but did Jackson ever have any psychiatric care? My friend Alana King was wondering that. And also, I seem to remember that he went to some type of rehab at some point. Am I wrong?
You know, that's
no,
an interesting
you're right.
question. Go ahead.
In 1993, August, I did my very first story about the allegations against Michael Jackson from the first young boy. He was on tour in Mexico. That tour was interrupted while he went into rehab in London. So, Patty, boy, you have a good memory. I think there were some other times when his parents, his mother specifically, wanted him to get some rehab, some psychiatric care. I understand Janet, his sister, had arranged some group psychiatric care, but Michael Jackson, again, was just not interested, according to everybody I spoke to.